Hey guys, welcome back to this next episode of Album Analysis Deep Dive for Bass Players. Today we're going to look at Radiohead's The Bends from 1995. What an amazing, influential album, one of my all-time favorites. So, like always in this series, we're going to talk about this album over the course of like an hour or so on many different levels. We're going to look at the historical context of what was going on in the world and what was going on in Radiohead's career when they made this album. That, of course, impacts what they were going through while they were writing and tracking and producing. So it shows up in the bass parts. We're going to talk about bass gear and production techniques and all that kind of stuff. And maybe most importantly, we're going to take 3 tracks that I think have especially strong, noteworthy bass parts. And I'm going to try to break them down for you. So yes, I'll show you how to play them. But more than that, we're going to talk about the music theory. We're going to talk about and listen to how the bass and drums lock in as a team. We're going to talk about chord analysis and how the bass notes relate to the harmony. We're going to talk about where Collin Greenwood on bass follows the typical rules of rock bass playing and where he breaks them. And there's some examples of both. Over the course of this, I don't just want you to be able to learn how to play the songs. I want you to be able to understand a bit about who he was as an artist when he was recording these songs with this band. Now, a quick note, if that's a little more depth than you're looking for, and you kind of just want to know how to play one of these songs, I'll link these below, but I've already recorded 3 individual videos where I take a song, each of these 3 tracks, I play it start to finish. You can see my hands, see my technique. I've included the musical notation and the tablature because I transcribed each of these 3 songs note for note, start to finish, so that hopefully you never have to do that. So if you just want to know how to play one of these songs, check out below, go watch one of those videos, have fun with it. Let me know if you have questions and enjoy learning and playing. But if you want the deep dive and the finer points of executing these bass lines, stay here. We're going to get into it. All right, let's start with historical context. So like I said, this album comes out in 1995. Let me give you a bit of background, and we can think about it this way. What are the popular records at the time? So let's go back to 1993. 1993, the 3 biggest records in the US and the UK at that point, Mariah Carey's Music Box, Snoop Dogg's Doggy Style, Pearl Jam's Verses. So 3 different genres, pop/R&B, hip-hop, rock. 1994, the 3 biggest records are Hootie and the Blowfish, Cracked Rear Window, Green Day's Dookie album, and Nirvana's MTV Unplugged. So what's the important difference there? From 1993 to 1994, rock re-solidified itself as the dominant musical force in pop culture. And here we are looking at a rock band recording their album at that time. So it sort of sets the stage that when Radiohead's working on this album, there's a ton of money, there's a ton of visibility, and there's a ton of criticism of what's happening in rock music. There's also a ton of label pressure for bands to look and sound and write, perform certain ways. And Radiohead, long story short, kind of breaks some of those molds, which ends up making this album a much harder experience for them. Though the songs they write justify it all. So here's the thing. Labels and industry executives in these early parts of Radiohead's career didn't really like the band that much, frankly. Their first album comes out in 1993, Pablo Honey, and it ends up being a big commercial success, basically because the song Creep, which I think we all kind of know the lore, the band didn't actually really love the song that much, but the song just resonated with people. And it became this alternative mega hit internationally, sort of against the music industry's wishes, because they didn't really see Radiohead as a very commercially viable entity. But Creep becomes this huge hit. Radiohead ends up having lots of success on their first album. They're super young, a bunch of young guys, like in their early 20s. And it's sort of like all their dreams come true, only they kind of hate it. They're touring and they have the one-hit wonder experience where fans are standing there with their arms crossed, disinterested for their whole set. And then when they play Creep for the encore, finally the audience comes to life in a lot of places. And there's all this commercial pressure around the music. And again, all of this for a song that the band wasn't really that passionate about to begin with. So coming into the second album, they're all pretty jaded. They're all kind of burnt out on music, and it shows up in the studio. Their initial experiments are pretty rocky. They all kind of know the first handful of things they try working on their sophomore album don't sound very good. They start to get nervous, they get stressed out. At different points, each of the 5 band members very seriously considered quitting the band and leaving music altogether because they were having such a bad time with it. Now, I want to juxtapose this for a minute against the culture of the mid-90s. Radiohead's from the UK, but I'm going to speak about the UK and the US together. In the mid-90s, generally speaking, things were pretty good in that part of the world. Economy was quite strong. There was a lot of emerging technology that was making daily life more comfortable and more pleasant. Even socially and politically, there was, broadly speaking, an atmosphere of sort of collaboration, connection, and positive energy, positive attitudes towards the people around you. So you're kind of living in a world where everybody's feeling very bright about the future, but these young guys who have just had all the success are individually feeling awful and feeling very discouraged about the future. I think that sets the stage for the music that they make. The biggest songs off this album end up being the ballads, the sad songs, and there's something about them that resonates. Of course, they made those sad songs when you think about how they were feeling, and the fact that those songs resonated so much tells us that maybe in the mid-90s, maybe not everybody was feeling quite as optimistic as it seemed they were from the outside. So they made art that resonated, even though at the time it was sort of against the dominant societal messages that were happening. All right, now, within all of this, their relationship with their label is a massive source of stress. It's one of the reasons they had such a bad time. They're basically getting a mixed message or two-part message where their label is telling them, listen, guys, you had better recreate the commercial success of Creep or else. And at the same time, their label is also kind of telling them, we still don't really like you that much. We really prefer American grunge style acts right now, like Nirvana and Pearl Jam. We see grunge bands as being the safe investment for this label's money. We see you as being kind of a risky gamble, and we're not that into your music anyway. So Radiohead is getting this very mixed and discouraging message, and that's making it all the harder for them to have any confidence in the studio. Like I said, their initial experimentations are going really poorly. Producer John Leckie gets brought in, who ends up being an encouraging and sort of calming presence. He brings a lot of playfulness. He helps them tap back into just having fun in the studio, trying things for the sake of experimentation, kind of letting them be artists again instead of the commercial entities that they had been transformed into over the last 2 years. And John Leckie's a huge force in allowing them to kind of connect to something meaningful. The way they do that is the band begins to really think of and play with the studio as an instrument on its own. They start to experiment more with production techniques, everything from how they're miking different instruments to what mics they're using, all the way up to more experimental techniques at the time, like playing over layers of pre-recorded information where you have multiple things that were tracked in sequential order all happening at once, creating a rich palette, rather than just like 5 dudes playing a song in a studio one time and it gets recorded that way. So they stumble onto a formula that ultimately starts to work for them. The creation of the album, it gets really messy. There's personnel changes on the production side. There's a whole battle over who's going to mix the album, and certain people involved loved the way it ended up sounding and certain people didn't. But at the end of the day, it resonated with the fans. Initial reception of the album was a little bit mixed, but over time, people loved the bends. And since then, it's come to be regarded just more and more strongly as time has passed, but it's come to be regarded as one of the landmark rock albums. Certainly one of the 200 or so most influential rock albums. A lot of people would argue it's Radiohead's actually most influential. Maybe not their most popular, maybe not the one that their fans love the most, but probably broadly speaking, their most influential album. So that sets the stage. Now within all of that, Collin Greenwood is playing bass for the band, and he's an absolute monster. He's an incredible player. But again, think about what I just said. He's coming off this tour and this first album experience where, like the rest of the band, he's feeling broadly kind of discouraged and disinterested. Uh, and he finds his path by experimenting a little bit with the way he plays and really just embracing straight ahead rock bass playing, including some kind of classic rock and roll influence. Now, one of the things that's great about his playing on this album that's really going to be accessible for you all, he's not a gearhead. He doesn't, later on, this is all going to change, but at this point in his career, he's not that into like, experimental crazy bass sounds. Let me give you a rundown of his gear in the studio on these tracks. So coming into it, like I said, not a gearhead. He's basically got one bass, and that's his bass that he plays live. It's a Music Man Sterling at that time. And while there's a little bit of mixed information, depending on what sources you trust, the consensus from the people who were actually in the room for these sessions is that he didn't really play that Sterling much or at all on the album. What he ended up tracking on mostly was a 1972 Fender Mustang. It wasn't his bass. It was something he was borrowing. And this might have been a decision by John Leckie. Producers often will recommend, hey, why don't you try it on this instrument? It might work better in the overall mix. It might have been a decision Collin made. It might have been something else. But a lot of the album seems to have happened on that bass. There's also at least one song that happened on a borrowed 1960 Fender P bass. And how awesome does that sound? Who doesn't want one of those? Across the board, he tends to play on round wound strings. I've got round wounds on my P bass here to demo these songs so I can try to get as close to the tone as possible. So round wound strings as opposed to flat wound strings, if you're not familiar with this conversation, they're much brighter. They have a lot more of that zingy sound, especially as you slide across frets. A lot more zing, a lot more top end. They're messier. You get more string noise, you get more fret sound, you can get more accidental noise out of the instrument. Though, of course, in a rock context, that accidental noise kind of just blends in and actually sounds cool. They're a little bit tougher to play because they're so messy and noisy, but they have a really cool sound. They lose some of the warmth of flat wounds, but you get this big, bright top end that just cuts through a loud rock band in particular. Now, I have fairly new round wounds on today. They're not like brand new, but they're probably less than a month old. I have a feeling, just going by my ears, that on some of these songs, he might have been playing on brand new strings, especially Bones, which is one of the tracks we'll look at today. I think those might be like straight out of the box. Those are very crispy strings. There's a chance to use some flat wounds in there too. High and Dry, for example, to me, I can't really tell if those are rounds or flats. Nobody seems to know for sure. Some people say this, some people say that. But broadly speaking, the sound of this album is round wound strings. Now, he did play through an amp. This was still the era where serious commercial endeavors, the bass player would play through an amp, which would be mic'd. And the amp that he played through was an Ampeg SVT 8x10 cab, so a big, loud cab, which makes sense since they had just done some major touring. And for the head, he's got a Gallien-Kruger 800 RB. So he's mixing brands, getting a great sound out of it. Now, one of the things that I love about looking at this album, especially for like student bass players who maybe haven't built up a huge arsenal of tools and gear yet, you don't need much. Like I said, he wasn't a big gearhead, and he's not getting super into crazy experimentation with pedals and traditional bass sounds. Basically, there's compression, because there's always compression if we're recording bass. There's got to be. And, there's a bit of grit. There's like a bit of drive. Maybe there's a little fuzz here and there, a little distortion here and there. But it's basically just those two ingredients. There's compression and there's grit. And as long as you can emulate that with your rig, you're going to be able to capture the sound of this pretty well. If you've got a compressor pedal and some kind of gritty, drive or whatever, you're going to be able to make it work. So you don't need much. It kind of captures the spirit of what I want to say about this album, which is that he's very he's a rock bass player in the lane of rock bass players, and he's doing that very, very well, and he doesn't need to reach for anything too out there. Now, of course, later in Radiohead's career, he's going to get into all kinds of cool creative stuff, but here, he's just like the rock bass player playing rock bass, and that's cool. That's really awesome. So it's kind of a gear rundown. Now, one other thing as far as sound goes, across this album, in the mixing stage, they put on a ton of reverb. Everything is drenched in reverb. In fact, producer John Leckie ended up kind of hating the final mixes because he felt like it was too washed out and something was lost. But I point that out because if you're trying to play along, or especially if you're trying to record yourself playing to these songs, if you've got a dry bass sound, it is going to stick out and sound like it doesn't mix in a weird way because what's missing is that reverb. Now, it's not that Collin was putting reverb on his bass. It's that reverb was being added on the mixing stage to the band as a whole. So just keep that in mind. Okay. Let's talk about a couple themes to look for in Collin's playing. I'm going to name them up front so that we can point them out time and time again as we look at our songs. So we'll name the themes and then we'll get into our 3 songs. Number 1, he is a motif-focused player. When I say motif, it's a musical term that refers to a short idea, usually like 3 to 7 notes. And a motif can be repeated identically again and again and again in a song, or a motif can be kind of played around with, loosely repeated, but maybe varied each time. Motifs can be signals, like, here comes the chorus, I'm going to play this bass fill, which he does in one of these songs. Motifs can be bass lines themselves. I'm going to play this figure over and over again, and it's going to kind of hypnotize the audience in a good way. He uses motifs in a lot of creative ways, and we're going to point them out as we go. Number 2, like every member of this band, he is very compositionally aware. Yes, he's like the bass player in the band, and that's kind of the hat that he wears, but he's thinking about song structure. He's thinking about verse, chorus. He's thinking about how his bass parts interact with the lyrics and the melody. He's thinking on a very high level, kind of like a producer would. Now, I think the other big point I want to emphasize, he's so rhythmically fun and creative. Across these tracks, he doesn't do much crazy in terms of note choices. A lot of this is root 5th octave, pentatonic scales, walking up to the next note, walking down to the next note. It's a lot of things that are sort of, with all due respect, kind of painting by numbers in terms of rock bass playing. But with the rhythm, he really lets his personality out. He does so much cool rhythmic stuff. Sometimes he's very tight rhythmically and locks right in with the kick drum, which we'll see examples of. Sometimes he's real loose and improvisational, and every measure is a different rhythm, which we'll also see an example of. Rhythm is really the tool that he uses to kind of paint as a bass player on this album. And it's a very mature choice, by the way. Last thing I'll say, pocket-wise, and this is kind of a varsity level point that not everybody, you may or may not kind of know what I mean by this, but Collin's bass, he tends to push. He tends to play a bit ahead of the beat, to kind of lean forward and drive. Phil on drums tends to sit back, a little more relaxed, a little behind the beat. So you get this wonderful tension that happens in a lot of rock music, where the drums are a little behind, the bass is a little ahead, and every note, you get this kind of effect of the bass leaning forward, the drums leaning back, and it creates this bit of welcome, fun tension. It also means that he ends up functioning as sort of a driving rhythmic force for the pocket across this album. He's the one who's kind of keeping the band moving, keeping it from getting too sluggish. He's the one who's kind of bringing some energy in the rhythm section. Whereas Phil on the drums is bringing some depth, some pocket, some like nod your head kind of stuff. So they work together really well, and they're a little bit more divided on their pocket than what happens in some other bands where things are very unison. It's cool. It's a great effect. All right, we're ready to look at our first track. So we've got Bones, one of the coolest and most attention-grabbing bass lines on this album by a mile. Really, really cool part, very influenced by classic rock and roll. And I'm saying rock and roll because I mean the music of the 50s and 60s, which we usually call rock and roll as opposed to rock. That old school, early rock music, kind of boogie-woogie influenced, where the bass is doing this like nonstop rolling kind of thing, and it doesn't really let up. It's a consistent, steady rhythm, just with different notes happening. Let's go ahead and listen to a chunk of the verse, and you'll hear what I mean.
Don't wanna be crazy.
So this really cool rolling rock and roll influence, rolling bass part. Now it's modernized, it's brought up to speed to the mid 90s. He's not just playing a boogie woogie line, but it's kind of drawing on that tradition. Let's talk about the chords that are happening, because the chords for a song are kind of like the bones, no pun intended, the skeleton that the song is built around. So we're in the key, I would argue at least, we're in the key of A mixolydian. Mixolydian mode, it's like our major scale but with a flat 7. You could also think of this as being in D major, which is the same notes, just in a different order. But I don't think that they were probably thinking of D major. I think they probably were thinking about that A mixolydian, A dominant 7 kind of sound, which again is very like classic rock and roll to be rooted on a dominant 7 sound. So the chords on the verse, we've got a D, which would be like the 4 chord, going to a G major, which would be the 7 or flat 7, we might call it, going back to a D, but this time over an F sharp in the bass, just to add some variety. And then it lands on an A sound, but they don't just play an A major or even an A7, they do an A sus. So with the sus chord, in case you're rusty on that, instead of the 3rd, we either play the 4th or the 2nd. And it kind of hides from the listener, is this major or minor? It makes it a little more mysterious, gives it a different flavor. So one more time, we've got the 4 chord, the 7 chord, the 4 chord, but with a different root bass note. And then we've got this 1 chord, but it's a sus. And you could also think of it as an A sus 7. Very, very cool progression, very simple and straightforward. And the bass part goes like this. Now that's a composite part, and what I mean is I'm showing you a version that I think basically captures his main idea. The reason I'm doing that is he actually plays this slightly differently every time. He varies the rhythm a little bit here and there, he varies the order of the notes a little bit here and there, but this is kind of the version he plays most often in the song, so I think this is a good representative version of his general idea, even though he's improvising with it. All right, so what's going on here? Well, really nothing too crazy. Remember, I said in the intro, on this album, he's not making a lot of wild note choices. It's his rhythm that's bringing character and energy to the bass. Harmonically, he's kind of just playing the roots for the most part. I mean, over that D, he's playing a D. Over the G, he's playing a G. When it gets to the D over F sharp sound, he's going F sharp, E, F sharp. So it's like the 3rd, the 2nd, the 3rd. That's a little cell that is going to show up again in the chorus. So notice that. This is an example of him being motif-based. Here's a motif that he's going to come back to and emphasize more later in the song. And then when we get to that A sus sound, he does this really cool thing. Basically what he's doing is he's really hammering a lot on the A, the root note, but every now and then he's just throwing in different notes from the scalar chord. So he does B, which is the 2nd. He does E and F sharp, which is like a pentatonic 5, 6. And sometimes he does the 3rd. At other points in the song, he plays it this way, which is 2, 3, 5, 5, 3. It reminds me a lot of like bassline to Peter Gunn, if you know that. Where you have a low pedal note that's kind of being repeated over and over, jumping to different other intervals around the chord and scale. Again, very classic rock and roll. It's clear he's drawing on some of that early rock and roll bass material here and just bringing it up to speed for the 90s. So one more time. Here it is all together. Great line. Now, you could play this with open strings. Like when I first transcribed this just by ear and I thought about, all right, how should I play it? My first inclination was this will get a lot easier if I use that open A. But I watched some live videos of them playing it, especially in this era, and I hate to say it, looks to me like he's playing it all up here. I don't think he's using that open string. Maybe he'll use it now and then for a single passing note, but I think most of the time he's actually playing that A on that 5th fret. So I try to do that just to emulate him more closely. When you play it there, this is going to be a tough one on your hands because you're really going to have to stretch a bit, especially if you're a bass player with smaller hands. We're down here in the register of the instrument where there's more string tension, meaning it takes a bigger toll on our musculature. So just be mindful as you practice this that you don't overdo it. You might need to build up a little stamina with this bass line. It can kind of wear you down to play this nonstop for 3 minutes. When we get ready to go to the chorus now, it's going to kind of draw on this but be fairly similar. But before we do that, let's just listen one more time to the verse and let's just hear isolated bass and drums, this verse part one more time. Okay, and I thought of one more thing I want to add. He does this awesome thing, and it highlights my point again that he's this very motif, composition-minded bass player. Each time he's about to go to the chorus, each time the song is going to the chorus, he signals it with a particular bass motif. He does this. One more time. D. And all that is, this is happening over that D over F sharp, F sharp, D, E. So 3, 1, 2, and then on to the next chord, the A. And he does that as an anticipation where he hits the A just before the next measure starts and lets it hang over. It's such a nice little melody line, and he only plays it right before the choruses. It's this little trick that he uses in a couple of these songs where there's a little bass part that sort of signals to the listener, here comes that chorus again. And it becomes almost like a second melody. Okay, now we're ready to talk about the chorus. So let's go ahead and listen first. Maybe we'll do the full band. We'll talk about the chords and the bass line. Harmonically, a little bit different, just some slightly different vocabulary going on. We're going down to an E minor, which is like the 5. And because we're in A mixolydian, the 5 is a minor. And then we kind of walk up. Here's the root or bass motion of the chords. Nope, that's wrong. That's it. Yeah. So we've got this ascending root motion, and again, the chords, we've got E minor, then we've got D over F sharp, then we've got G, and then we've got A. And this time it's more like an A triad than an A sus. Minor 5, 4, but with the third in the root, 7, 1. Just a nice ascending. Really good, simple, like rock writing where we get these good, clean, minimalistic root motion things happening with some slightly interesting chords on top. Now, the bass part that he does over it, he's kind of just staying in the same lane. He backs off this consistent rolling eighth notes a little bit. Here's a composite line for the chorus. So for the E, he's just hitting that low E. And now for the D over F sharp and the G, he brings back that little motif I pointed out from the verse. So F sharp, E, F sharp, G, F sharp, G. It's like note, one lower, back to note. It creates this little cell or motif that he moves through this progression, and it's nice. And on the A, he goes back to that kind of rolling Peter Gunn style thing. To go back down to the E, he always walks down G, F sharp into it. And when it's ready to go back to the verse, he'll usually either stay on like an A arpeggio note, or at one point he even does this thing, which is cool. Which is kind of, it's the G, the 7th, and the 6th. So he's kind of emphasizing that A dominant sound, which leads us right back to D. Cool sound. So again, little details, nothing crazy in terms of note choice, but little details that really add to the overall composition. But by and large, what matters on this track is the rhythm. Let's go ahead and listen to the drums and bass isolated on the chorus. Let's move on to our next track, High and Dry. So this is probably the most popular song off the album, or certainly way up there, at least on that list. Really amazing bass part written over a ballad, and that doesn't always happen. Often with ballads, we think of bass playing that's so minimalistic that it's transparent, and we don't necessarily think a lot about it. Certainly this is good, effective ballad playing. He's not overstepping anywhere. But he's able to find these little ways to add interest. And again, it's going to come back to him being motif-focused and being very rhythmically smart. Let's dig into it here. Now, we'll get into chords first because this whole song is just a simple chord progression over and over. We're in the key of E this time. And our chords, we've got our 2 chord, which would be, F sharp minor 7. Only they actually make it an F sharp minor 11, where we add the 4th in. And then they've got an A sus 2. We were just talking about sus chords for bones a second ago. So that's like the 4 chord, but it's a sus. And then we resolve it all with our E. And what happens there, we won't walk through every note of this, but here's the basic idea. With that F sharp minor 11 and that A sus 2, a lot of the notes stay the same between those two chords. It's a beautiful, simple progression. The root motion 2-4-1 is extremely common. It's definitely some must-know material. Shows up a lot in pop music and other places. And that's the progression for really the whole song. Now the guitar is doing some cool stuff that sort of brings in some other colors at different points, but those are the basic chords. Now that that's out of the way, we can talk about the different bass lines, and what he does so masterfully on this is that Collin finds a way to make different parts of the song feel wildly different, even though it is the same harmony happening underneath. And of course, it's a team effort with the drums, as we'll see. So let's check out a clip of the verse. There's two components of the verse. There's a softer section, which we might call like the A part, and there's a more driving section, which we might call the B part. Let's listen to a bit of both together. So this will be a longer listening clip.
Flying on your motorcycle, watching on the ground beneath you drop. You kill yourself for recognition, kill yourself to never ever stop. You broke another mirror, you're turning into something you are not. Don't leave me.
So on that softer part of the verse, he's just playing root notes, big, full, beautifully executed whole notes. F sharp, A, E, and then the low E. Hopefully that's pretty cut and dry for high and dry. Let's talk about the B part though, because this is where he does something that's so masterful and timeless. I honestly think it's one of the best components of the song. He comes up with this bass part, and it's similar to the devices that we talked about with Bones. He picks a particular rhythm, and he's very faithful to that rhythm. Every measure is basically the same rhythm, but he varies the note choices to create interesting melodies that then become hooks of their own and catch a listener's ear, similar to how a vocal would. I'll play it once, and then we'll talk through the rhythm, and we'll talk through the note choices. We'll spend a little time here, because seriously, it's such a good, creative, masterful bass line. And then the fill, which we'll talk about in a minute on its own. The rhythm here, he's got a little bit of 16th note stuff happening. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. It's what we call a hemiola pattern, which is kind of a polyrhythm thing, that 3 and 4 E 1. It kind of combines different figures and creates the illusion of a different feel. That's kind of a higher level concept that we won't dig into here, but if you know it already, recognize that that's a hemiola. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 E and 1. Cool. So he stays very faithful to that rhythmic figure. It's that every single measure, and he creates interest by choosing some cool notes. That figure, of course, locks in with the kick drum, by the way. Let's talk about the notes, and then we'll just listen to the drums and bass executing this together so powerfully. Over the F sharp, he walks up just with a simple F sharp, G sharp, A. 1 and 2 and 3. Now the first time around, he goes down to the E simply by walking down. A, G sharp, E. 1 and 2 and 3. Now it stays on that E for 2 measures, right? So he kind of vamps on it by bringing in the low fifth. Now this time he walks up. He does a skip basically. So he does the E and then the 3rd, G sharp, and drops down to the F sharp. And now we're back at the beginning of the progression, and he could easily have just done it again a second time, but he doesn't. That's one of those things that makes it so cool. He extends it to make it to make it an 8-bar melody, 2 times through the progression. He gives us a longer melody so there's more interest to hook into. So the second time around, F sharp, he actually goes up to the B, the 4th. Now, quick note, 4ths don't typically sound great to emphasize over a major chord, but they do sound great over minor chords. So that's why it works. And drops down to the A. Back down to the E again, A, G sharp, E. Only this time he doesn't go to that middle E, he goes all the way down to the low E. So second time through we get this. And especially if you're playing, without a compressor, you'll have to control that low E so it's not way louder than the other notes. Compressors help with that a little bit. So that's the part. Let's listen to it one more time and just really take this in. This is the kind of thing, it might not seem like a big deal, but man, oh man, to write a part this solid, this tight on a ballad that doesn't get in the way of the lyrics and the song and the sad tone of it, but at the same time is a really cool bass part, is extremely difficult to do. So let's appreciate it one more time.
Kill yourself for recognition. Kill yourself to never ever stop. You broke another mirror. You're turning into something new enough. Don't leave me.
And boy, we would be remiss. I don't think we could do a good analysis of this album if we weren't specifically talking about this bass fill. I'm not kidding when I tell you this is one of my favorite bass fills of all time. I just think it's so, so good. And it's so simple and so clever. That's why it's so powerful. All we're doing is the pentatonic scale, but he starts it on the 3rd. So this is over the E chord. He starts it on the G sharp, but he slides into that G sharp. So kind of from the F sharp. So it starts on the 3rd, but slides in from the 2nd. And then he just goes down the scale. 3, 2, 1, 5, 6. He's just descending down the pentatonic scale from the 3rd. But the thing that makes it, every single note is syncopated, meaning it's happening on the ands, not on the beat. I'll link a separate lesson below about syncopations because it's a whole topic on its own. But if you're counting 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and syncopated rhythms refers to when we're playing on the ands. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1, 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1. And it lands on this low F sharp, which is where the chorus starts. Because again, it's the same progression. And I wish I had a good way to show you. This thing would be so lame if he played that on the beat. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. That'd be actually like a horrible addition, and it would be better without that fill at all. It's the fact that it's syncopated that makes it cool. 2, 3, and 4, and 1, and 2, and 3. And it's one of the biggest landmarks of this whole track, that bass fill. Now, it's just like that motif I talked about in Bones. Where he does it every time we go to the chorus as this signifier. It's a landmark, it's a motif, but it's sort of like if you're looking at a map and somebody tells you you're going to turn left to the library. It's a motif that acts as a landmark. When you hear this sound, the chorus is happening. Chorus. And this is such a big, powerful chorus that it benefits from having that lead in. So such an amazing part. Simple line. It's not flashy, right? This isn't the kind of thing that's going to like get 1 million views on Instagram, but it's the kind of thing that will sell 1 million records because it's so powerful. Let's just hear it one more time. I'll play it, and I'll play it into the chorus. You can hear the chorus as we get into that. Same chords, remember that? And that means that we've got 3 different bass lines over the same progression throughout the song. We've got the whole note version. We've got the one we just looked at, really cool in the verse. On and on. And now we've got the chorus version. And again, he's using simple note choices, simple melodies, but with a motif mindset. He creates a figure, a rhythmic figure, and actually a melodic figure, and then he just transposes it through the different chords, meaning he kind of plays like the same thing over each chord, but it sounds different each time because the chords are changing. Let me play it for you. And again, this is kind of a composite part that I'm showing you. In reality, there are little variations over the track where he does it a little differently this time versus that time. This is a good general representation. Let's name what it is up front. Root 5th octave. And here I go again. I'll link another video below where I break down root 5th octave for beginners because it's a pretty big concept on the bass. But basically, over each of these chords, he's only using 3 notes. The low root, the high root, and the 5th between them. This is a really crucial and very universally used piece of vocab. Shows up all the time. It's very harmonically transparent because it works over major or minor chords. And here, he's using it and he's playing it with a particular rhythm, a little bit busier. He's down in the lower register of the bass now compared to the verses where he's more in the middle register. So it makes this chorus feel a bit bigger. There's more of a bottom end to support it. But all that said, it's still a fairly simple part. The basic rhythm, I had to remember it. 1, 2, 3, and 4, and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So let me just play it on the F sharp minor. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and 4 E. Root, root, 5th root, root, 5th root, 5th. Sorry. Root, root, 5th root, root, 5th root, root, 5th root, root, 5th. A nice simple line, and he just moves that up and down the chords. Over the A, over the E. So over the E, it's actually the same thing, but it looks a little different. Because we're using an open string. Now you could play it down here. But I like to play it up here because I'm already there. My hand is already there from the A. Plus with round wound strings and kind of new round wounds like I think he's using. The difference between that E open and that E here on the second fret of the D string fretted, they just sound quite different, and I don't like the blend as much as that all sort of fits together a little more nicely, if you ask me. So it's a great, simple part. Oops. Root fifth octave is such a perfect choice for like a rock, coarse groove, because it's not going to get in the way of anything, but it's big and powerful, and you can kind of get into some funky rhythms without stepping on anybody's toes. So really awesome part here. Again, him as a motif-based player. Here's a motif, he moves it around. Him as a rhythmically minded player, he picks a rhythm and commits to it. So over the course of the song, which I guess at the end of the day is probably my favorite one of these three, we really get to see that. Final track here. Let's check out Blackstar. So one of the things you're going to notice if you try to play along with this, it's going to sound like something's wrong because it sort of is. It's out of tune. Now, it's not that like the band didn't tune their guitars. What's happening here is something that we see a lot in rock music throughout history. They recorded the song together, and this one was a bit more of like a in the studio kind of rough and raw, let's just track it sort of thing. They recorded it together in tune at a slower tempo than what this song actually sits at. And then afterwards they were listening to it and they said, this might sound better if we speed it up a bit. Can we just speed the tape up? But when you do that, at least with the technology they had at the time, the part of the result, a byproduct, is that the entire thing goes a little bit sharp, gets a little bit higher in pitch. And so because of that, it's going to sound a little bit out of tune. Now, if you're playing along to it, what you can do to accommodate that is tune your bass up just a little bit. You're going to have to kind of manually find it because it's not a different tuning. It's not like we're changing this from E to F. It's that it's an E that's a little bit sharp. I tried to kind of match it in the playthrough video I did, which again is linked below, note for note, yada, yada. But it's hard. It's hard to get it exactly right because it's just a little bit funky and it's difficult to match it. So don't think you're crazy if you notice that, and don't think you're in the wrong tuning. They're in standard tuning. They're just a little bit sharp because the tape was sped up after the fact. That said, we're going to ignore that for now, and I'm going to talk about it as if it's just perfectly in standard tuning. Let's go ahead and listen to a bit of it for a second here, but I'll say this. We're going to look at two sections from the song. Unlike the other songs we've listened to, this one has many different sections with different chords and all that. I'm not going to walk you through all of them because, frankly, I think it'll get a little boring. I bet this video might be a little bit long already. I'm going to pick out the two that I think are coolest. I'm going to show you the intro because I think the composition is really, really fascinating there. And I'm going to show you the third verse because there's a bass and drum breakdown that I think we have to talk about as bass players. The rest of the song is in that playthrough video I did if you want to check that out on your own. But let's check out the video for now. Sorry, the intro for now. Okay, so in standard tuning, we are now in the key of G. And again, they're a little sharp, so it's going to sound slightly different. With this one, you might notice that it just feels very interesting. There's no other way to put it. It just feels like a unique and novel piece of music, this intro, because it is. Part of how they're getting that sound is with some time signature stuff. What's happening is a trick that like the Beatles used a lot and some other great writers have used. They're going back and forth between a measure of 4/4 and a measure of 2/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2. Let me just play the bass line and I'll try to count it as I play. 1 and 2 and a 3 and 4 and 1 and 1 and a 2. 1, 2 and 1 and 2, a 3 and 4 and 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, hard to count in place, so that was rocky, but hopefully you get the idea. It's going back and forth between 4/4 and 2/4. And that creates this interesting rhythm where it doesn't end when you think it's going to end. It starts over and it feels like it's starting over early. This highlights a big theme that I want to name that's true about Radiohead as a unit and Collin Greenwood as a bassist. So indulge me for a second here. In music, when we're writing, the audience listening is always going to have expectations about what happens next. I don't just mean musicians, I mean anybody. This is how music works. We listen and our brain automatically guesses where it thinks the music will go next. As writers, we can do two things. We can either comply with the expectations, which can be very rewarding for the listener. Think of the end of a piece of classical music. You get that big dominant seventh, and then it resolves. And it's so nice. Complying with expectations. The other thing we can do is we can subvert expectations, where we don't do what the listener will expect us to. There's that chord, but guess what? We're going there. All right, that's cool. That's interesting. Complying with expectations is familiar and comforting and feels good in that way. Subverting them is interesting and novel and exciting. It's rewarding in that way. Good writers balance both. If we only comply with expectations, we're going to make really boring, predictable music. If we only subvert expectations, it's going to be too out there and strange to really resonate. We have to balance both. And Radiohead does that fantastically. I would argue that Collin does that in a lot of these bass parts we've looked at today. Sometimes he does what we would expect the bass to do, high and dry. Yep, sounds like a ballad. But sometimes he subverts. Oh, now it's like funky. Okay, didn't see that coming for a ballad. It's a balance of the two. And this section leans heavily on subverting expectations. This time signature thing throws the audience off in a good way. So that's the rhythm. Now, harmonically, what's happening here, it's not that complicated, but it feels like it is because of the time signature thing. So we're in the key of G again. We've got a D, which is the 5 chord, going to an E minor 7 over B. So it's got the 5th in the bass, which is that kind of sound. And that's the first measure. That's the 4/4 part. And then it does this little walk down where it goes C, G over B, A sus. Kind of played as an A sus7. And you might notice that that A sus chord has shown up in all 3 of these songs today. Clearly they like that sound in that chord. So again, 5 chord, going to the 6th chord, but with the 5th of the chord in the bass. And that little walk down. 4, 1 over 3, 2 sus. Really cool part. Really, really awesome writing. And the bass kind of just follows it, but here's the thing. On this song, more than any other, Collin is really improvising, especially rhythmically. If you isolate this bass part and you listen to the whole thing or you watch my play along, it's kind of like he's just jamming to the chords. And he plays almost every single measure differently. Even that intro line I showed you, that's a composite part that I'm kind of pulling out because he plays it differently every single time, particularly when it comes to the rhythm of the notes. But if we try to pick it apart, here's what he's doing. Kind of like that. Over the D, he's just playing the D. Nothing crazy there. When we get to that E minor 7 over B sound, he plays, so he starts on the B, which is the designated bass note of that chord, and then he kind of goes up to the C, which would be the 6th, B again, and down to the G, which would be the 3rd. some of the more interesting note choices that we've seen in these in this example so far. And then for the walk down, he just follows it, C, B, A. And of course he does, because if you've got this interesting harmony thing written into the chords, as a bass player, you have to just follow that. You can't do something more complicated because the audience will lose what's happening. So you have to just do that, and of course he does. It's the rhythm of it that might make it a little tricky. Let me slow it down, and hopefully I can count it a little more cleanly at a slow tempo. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and 1 E and a 2 E and. So again, there's a hemiola at the end, which we talked about in high and dry. Just notice that again. And he's a little more syncopated here, catching some of these things on a 16th note instead of on the beat or on an 8th note. I don't think there's too much else I want to say about that, but why don't we listen to it one more time, and let's just do drums and bass to get the feel of it. All right, let's check out the last section that we're going to look at together here. It's verse 3 of Blackstar. And we're looking at it because it's a bass, drum, and vocal breakdown. It's a rhythm section only verse, which is always a cool arranging trick. Before I say anything else, let's listen to it, but let's do something in particular with it. And what I want to do is this. I want you to focus on the kick drum and the bass, and I want you to notice that they are not synced up the way we often think of those instruments doing. The kick drum pattern is this. Do do ka do do ka do do ka do do ka. 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4. A fairly interesting and somewhat complicated kick drum pattern. Now, typically we would expect the bass to just lock right in and play that same rhythm or something close to it. And Collin doesn't. It's kind of interesting. Hear me out when I say this. Let me finish my thought. But it's sort of like what often happens with bands that kind of don't know what they're doing, where each member of the rhythm section like writes a part for a song in their bedroom at home, not thinking about the other parts, and then they show up and play them all together, and they don't fit together at all. Only here, it totally does work, and it comes off beautifully. It just breaks a lot of rules. The kick and the bass are not super synced up rhythmically. Sometimes they sync up for a few notes, and then Collin goes off and does his thing while Phil's doing his pattern. But it works, and it's really cool, especially since this is a breakdown and kind of like a rhythm section moment. So let's listen to it now.
I get on the train and I just stand about now that I don't think of you. I keep falling over, I keep passing out when I see a face like you. But I'm a coward.
Yeah, remember earlier I said this whole song, it kind of feels to me like Collin's just like jamming along a bit, and I mean that in the best sense. And here we see it again. He's not restricting himself to any specific part. The rhythm is a little different each time he does this stuff, but there are motifs and there are consistent note choices that make it still feel cohesive and intentional, so it's not just like a mess of noodling. Harmonically, here's what's going on. Again, we're in the key of G, remember that? And we've got G, which is our 1 chord, going to C, which is our 4 chord, going to G over B, going to D, which is our 5 chord. And it does that twice, and then at the end, it goes to our E minor, our 6 chord. G, C, G over B, D, E minor, and it hangs out on that E minor for a while. Nice simple progression, nothing too crazy. Let me go ahead and play this bass line. And since this one is so cool and it's such a bass moment, I'm actually going to put it note for note on the screen and I'll play it just like that. Wow, what a cool part. Now, there is a lot consistent each time he plays it here, though if you listen to verse 2, he plays it totally differently there. If you listen to verse 1, he plays it totally differently there. Sometimes he does this figure, and sometimes he doesn't. So it's there sometimes and it's not there in other verses. That's what I mean when I say he's just kind of jamming and there's a lot of variety here. Harmonically and note choice wise, there's nothing too crazy going on. He's playing a G over the G. He's playing a C over the C. He's going down to a B for the G over B, up to the D. So he's just playing root notes, in other words, or bass notes at least. And then over the E, we get this cool figure in the third verse. And all that is root, low fifth, and the second with some slides. And that second, or you can call it the ninth if you want, tends to be a really flavorful note over minor chords. A lot of cool bass lines do that, like Tame Impala and things like that. So it's just 3 notes, but boy, what a nice motif. And again, there it is. He's a motif-based player. This is a little hook that the listener listens to, and it becomes part of the melody of the song. Rhythmically, this is again a place where he uses variety in rhythm and syncopation and anticipation to create interest within this line. This would have been pretty boring if he had just gone like. Right, that would have been pretty straightforward. Even if he had just matched the drums and done like. That still would have been pretty simplistic and maybe not as good. He creates these interesting figures. And he does a lot of getting to notes kind of early and letting them hang, or syncopating notes. We could have a whole conversation about the rhythm of this one, and I won't subject you to all that right now, but just notice how much cool rhythm there is going in. And I want that to be inspiration. When you're working on music of your own or with a band, and maybe it's a rock song and it feels like fairly simple, and you're stuck in the rut of going, and you know that eighth notes aren't right for that song, think about this. Just give it a different feel. Not playing anything crazy, he's just giving it some cool rhythm, and it turns this song and this verse specifically into actually like a bass feature, which is amazing. So the only other thing I'll say, he does it again on the pre-chorus. Let me just play that for you real quick.
But I'm coming to
So let me do that, and it's C, B minor, D. So it's 4, 3, 5 are the chords. He's just playing root notes basically, but listen to how much variety he gets with the rhythm. Here it is. It's almost like, I think of like student books where it just has you play a bunch of different rhythms on one note. It's almost like he's doing that, but it sounds so cool. And all of that, you know, there's no way he wrote this out ahead of time and planned it. He's just playing it on the spot, letting himself kind of be inspired by the moment. Okay, so there's Blackstar for you. We've looked at 3 tracks and we've talked about the band as a whole. One more time, here are the big themes. This was a really challenging album for Radiohead to make. There was a ton of pressure for it to be commercially successful, while also a very clear message from the label that they didn't really believe in the band to begin with. And that created a very challenging and frustrating work experience, especially because the band didn't totally know where they wanted to go. All of them were pretty discouraged by the experience they had had with their first album and the tour that followed it. They were feeling a little bit hesitant about even pursuing music anymore. But they came together, partially with the help of producer John Leckie, and they made this amazing album that has gone on to be a real landmark in rock history. We looked at 3 tracks, Bones, High and Dry, and Blackstar, and we talked a bit about some different aspects within each, showed you some bass lines. The major points to notice with Collin's playing, he's very motif focused. He uses motifs to create interesting bass lines. He uses motifs to signal, here comes a chorus, here comes a cool part of a verse. He is very rhythmically minded. He's not making too many interesting, or unusual, I should say, note choices on this album, though he certainly will later in his career. Here, he's very much playing with rhythm as his primary tool for expression. And he's thinking like a composer. He's thinking big picture about the song structure and how it all works together to create a meaningful transition from verse to chorus or chorus to verse or whatever it is. Take this, study it. I've included those 3 videos below with each song note for note. So if there's one in particular that you like, go to that video, learn it. As always, you can message me and I'm happy to send you the PDF of the full transcription for one of these songs for free. So you can get the sheet music or the tabs start to finish and really sink your teeth into it. If you've enjoyed talking about this and you want to hear me blab more or ask me questions one-on-one, let me know. I do one-on-one lessons and I'm happy to talk about scheduling and rates and all that stuff with you. You can just message me on Instagram or email me. And let me know in the comments and all that if you've found this interesting, what you're taking away from this. Radiohead's one of these bands that I think we all, well, at least those of us who like rock music from these last couple decades, we all have so much affection for. And this early part of their career is so magical. I really love this album, and hopefully you do too. If you don't know it well, listen to it. Seriously, the whole thing is great. I had a hard time picking just 3 tracks. And I wish you all the best. So join me for another episode of this soon. And in the meantime, take care.